Podcast.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Morgan. I run our marketing team at Blueboard, and we're so excited to have you on today's event. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, so we'll use these next few to learn a little bit about you and to cover some housekeeping items. And as a reminder, today we're going to be talking about how to redefine inclusion and engagement. So as you're getting started or settled, we'd love to have the conversation get started. If you've been to a Blueboard or ThinkHuman webinar in the past, you know that we're really active on chat. We love to have this opportunity to knowledge share and also to hear from you. You'll find the chat tool in the bottom right of your Zoom toolbar. If you have any challenges finding it, please feel free to send us a note. And ultimately, we'll be using the chat over the next hour to, again, knowledge share, ask questions along the way so that it truly feels like we're all having a conversation together. So to get started, we'd love to hear from you. Please let us know where you're dialing in from, what your name is, and ultimately for anyone who's willing to share around the topic of inclusion specifically, would love to hear what you'd really like to learn today. What does inclusion currently mean to you when you're thinking about that specific term or the way that it comes to life in your workplace? And if you do have any awesome ideas or best practices to share, we'd love to hear how you're currently supporting inclusion and how that's coming to life in your workplace, whether remote or in person. So before we dive into our discussion, I wanted to also quickly introduce our sponsors. I'm with Blueboard. Again, for those just joining, we're a recognition platform that empowers amazing companies like The Trade Desk, Shake Shack, and Pinterest to reward top employees with meaningful experiences. That might be a kayaking trip or taking the family on an RV adventure to see some national parks or taking calligraphy classes from the comfort of your home. And ultimately, we're a platform that helps you deliver personalized experiences at scale, which means when thinking about inclusion, it's not one size fits all. It's empowering employees to choose the experience that's most meaningful to them. We're also partnering today with ThinkHuman. They are a leadership development and manager training company that delivers lasting change and habit formation in companies like SoulCycle, Spotify, and Snapchat. And now that you know a little bit about today's sponsors, we're going to be launching a poll on screen. If either of these opportunities are interesting to you, if recognition's on your mind, if manager training, leadership development is on your mind, we'd love to connect with you. The poll is your opportunity to raise a hand to learn more about either organization or both. You can select more than one. And our teams will be happy to get in touch with you after today's webinar. Two final housekeeping items. We'll be recording today's session, so no worries at all if you need to drop early. You'll be receiving a recording and recap from our team in the next coming days. And we'll also be offering our SHRM PDC. So for those of you looking for continuing education credits, we'll be sharing that through chat as we wrap up the event towards the end of the hour. So we are all here. We are ready to talk through this topic of redefining this new age of inclusion. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to our amazing host and moderator, Hakimia. She's a cultural strategist and executive coach at Divinely Powered, and she'll be leading our discussion today around this new age of inclusion. Welcome, Hakimia, and I will pass it over to you. Thanks, everyone, for being here.
Thank you for passing it over. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our attendees all across the world. I am Hakimia Jackson, a passionate executive coach, cultural strategist, and CEO of Divinely Powered. And today, I will be your ThinkHuman moderator. We are in an exhilarating time, y'all. What time is it, you may ask? I am glad you asked. This time that we're in, we're being called to action. A call from your talent to rise up and champion a more inclusive workspace and company culture. Today's workspace is full of brilliant minds with the will to change the trends of society. This driving force has spurred a diversity and inclusion movement that this generation has never seen. So today, we're going to explore the illustrious minds of our attendees pertaining to inclusion and redefining engagement. Additionally, we'll provide some practical tools and approaches that you can take with you to make your experience in your space more equitable and inclusive. So let's begin the exploration. Now, I'm about to start introducing our panelists. We have the amazing Oscar Robles, He is a diversity and inclusion facilitator and a program manager at Full Stack Academy. We also have Karen Weeks, who's the SVP of People at Order Grove and was named one of the 2020 Notable Women in Talent. We have Love Ode Kamui, who builds peace through dialogue and education and is the founder and CEO of Unsiloed. We have the amazing Maisha Hill, who is an anti-racism educator and founder of Check Your Privilege. How about we get started? Y'all ready? Are you ready, panelists? All right, unmute yourselves. Let's become unscripted today, all right? So please, let's get it started. How do we define in this new age inclusion? Karen, go ahead.
Sure. So hi, everybody. So excited to see everyone. You know, it's really been interesting, our journey, both for myself, but also at Order Groove. We've been thinking a lot about, well, you know, we were doing some things, like we were checking the boxes, we were doing okay. And then realized there was so much, we were not being purposeful about it. We didn't have a strategy. And so inclusion for us is not just checking the box and saying, look, we have X people from X thing on the census. It's saying we are welcoming, we're supportive, we are creating a safe space for people to have uncomfortable conversations in really in any place of their lives so they can bring their whole self to Order Groove. And so it's really sort of evolved to be more around creating that safe space for everyone to be themselves, not just checking the box and saying like, we didn't have any lawsuits for discrimination. That's not diversity and inclusion.
Not at all, not at all. You took out the policies, the procedures of I have to do it this way, and you made it personable and mission focused for your organization. That sounds good. What about you, Oscar?
I mean, you know, how do we define this new space? It is new, right? A lot of things are new. And I'm trying to not let newness be an overwhelming concept, right? Because I think sometimes when folks are encountered with newness, they're like, oh, this is new, this is different. You know, I'm not here for it. Or, you know, they lean into their tried and true energies, their tried and true spaces, which can sometimes be damaging or harmful for that newness to actually take root and potentially blossom and take form into something different. You know, my thoughts are already kind of going down this conversation, so I don't want to reveal too much.
Right.
On how I think about this, but you know, some new things that have been exciting is that new voices are coming up. You know, new groups, new collaborations are happening. New folks are expressing allyship. New folks are finding power in their voice to come together and either protest or promote, you know, their positions and actively engage. So I think I want to definitely lean into those spaces when we think about the newness that's happening.
Right. Love, why do you think inclusion is important right now at this time?
I think inclusion is important because, I mean, with all the advocacy and the protest that's happening, we've deeply recognized that we don't need to accept the status quo anymore. And all the ways in which we've been siloed, or all the gaslighting that may have happened to invalidate experiences, or making you feel like, oh, this must just be you, or, you know, maybe, you know, this person had good intentions, they didn't quite mean it that way. It's really important to recognize that that's sort of like the curtains have been pulled, and we can really ask for and advocate for the things that are really important. And what does that look like? People are asking for inclusion. People are asking for belonging. We recognize that it's no longer okay to trade our sense of safety for a paycheck. Or mental health. We don't need to trade that anymore. We don't need to trade our silence anymore. So I think that's really where it's at, because we do deeply recognize it's just deeply damaging. So we now recognize it's a time to feel safe to learn, feel safe to challenge the status quo, feel safe to be included and to ask questions, and to recognize that once people are negotiating on our humanity, it's probably time to close the door. So
come on, Love. Now you dropping bombs on us already, and I love it. Sure. I love it. So Maisha, please follow up with, you know, what does that inclusion look like today? And, And why is it important?
Yeah, inclusion, the biggest difference to inclusion today is we're living in a global pandemic where we're being faced with racism, mental illness, and COVID-19. And organizations have no choice but to lift the veil on their complicity with white supremacy and the ways that white supremacy is showing up in corporate culture. Because for most organizations, inclusivity has been a business strategy where we're looking at numbers and checking off the tick boxes. And it's time for organizations, if you're calling yourself inclusive, then you need to ask yourself, well, who has a seat at the table? Who has the power and pay? Who's being held accountable for harmful behavior, as Love just mentioned? What is the culture? Who makes all the decisions? And what are the ways that we are bringing, again, harmful microaggressive behaviors and attitudes and behaviors around white supremacy, such as perfectionism, power holding, and sense of urgency, into our inclusive practices. Inclusion also means you'll be able to have a restorative, a justice approach in a corporate setting. So.
Yes, ma'am. And what I hear all of you say, it's no longer being passive. We're being intentional about our inclusive efforts, and the people are keeping you accountable. Oscar had a really good perspective on something similar to what you said, Maisha, regarding us being at home in the pandemic. Oscar, would you like to share that? I love it. That's why I always put you on the spot.
Because it's so true. You know, I think I was saying this before, and this is directly tied to some of, the energy, where we're at. We're not all working from home. We're not all working from home. We're in the middle of a pandemic trying to work. And I think that distinction is really different, especially when we're talking about, like, what are the efforts that are being made towards equity and inclusion? What are the conversations that we're having? Where is the sense of urgency? I think that's a big piece. Where is the sense of urgency? Because I think that's why we see so many people who are out in the streets. We see so many people who are raising their voices, who are saying, listen, no, this is not for me. You're negotiating my humanity. It's time for me to get out. Like Love was talking about, people are feeling that urgency because we are in a state right now where we're facing I don't want to sound too heavy, but we're facing our mortality in a sense where it's like either
we certainly are.
Yes. Right?
Right? Like, not to be like, it's not doom and gloom, but it's around like, okay, if you never learned how to play the saxophone and you want to learn how to play the saxophone, now is the time to do it, right? Like, if you've never spoken up about police brutality, now is the time to do it, right? Because
time's up.
We're living in a sense of urgency, and we need to, challenge our perspective on that, I think, and not just kind of fall into a place of like, oh, we're all working remotely. Not all of us are like, in Cancun on a beach with our laptops out, right? Like, we are at home, also like, trying to carry and to mediate some of the things that are happening because of the pandemic that have escalated and brought to bear some of the, inequities and the issues around inclusion and equity. And I think that's a distinction we need to make.
Yeah, I think it's a huge distinction. I'm sorry, Karen, were you about to say something? Go ahead.
Oh, you're good.
I can read you.
I was thinking too about the concept of, I think another piece of the sense of urgency, at least what I've seen, is that there's also there's no place to hide. Like, what you are seeing all of me right now. And if I used to hide part of that by coming into the office, or I used to, suppress something within my team, that doesn't exist anymore. And so I think that has also brought some of the sense of urgency, is that you are seeing my whole self, or you don't know what's happening right around here, but I'm still seeing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't put on the mask any longer. Maisha and I talked about that too. Before, we could leave and take off that mask, but now it's like, I'm all exposed. This is all of me, accept me or not. Yeah. And the employer is starting to realize, if I don't, then I'm going to lose a whole lot. How will I operate? How will I meet performance? How will I hit revenue goals and metrics? So with that being said, I want us to think about, those times where, based on our definition of inclusion, think about those times where you may not have been able to bring your full self and all of your identities. So I want you to get vulnerable here with me, because I want our audience to see that, yes, we're all professionals, we're all experts at what we do, and we want the best for our organizations, but we too carry something. Please share and take it away. Anyone who would like to go first? So now I got to call on you.
We have so much respect for each other, Hakima.
Go ahead, love. Okay, go ahead, Oscar.
Because I think what I'm going to share is relevant. Like one thing as far as like bringing my full self to the table, if there's, or my full vulnerable self to the space, myself, like I'm a trans masculine person. Like I was assigned female at birth. And I think here's a perfect example of where I felt like, how do I bring my identity into the space? Because, as someone who was socialized as a woman, I'm sitting back and filling the back of my chair because I want to make space for the other women who are on this panel. Whereas, society has deemed me now, because I have these secondary masculine characteristics, as someone who is supposed to be the first one to speak, taking charge, showing up in the space. I think at work, I work in education, I work for a coding boot camp, I often see that. I often see how my, the assumptions that are made about me in the space, like, dictate what happens with the work that we do, and how the work is divided, how the work is shared, is who holds it. And I often find myself having to, challenge those preconceived notions on masculinity and femininity on who's doing the work, men or women within the team doing the work, and also who's getting credit for the work, right? Like who is getting the shine for the work, So I'm very much so try to make sure that I'm always like bringing folks with me. When people say, oh, who helped you on that? I'm the first one to say, this was not my idea. Gabby helped me. She was the, the champion of this. And I think, I do that. And it's a question of myself, like, okay, is this potentially, because, we're in the working world. Like, I know like how promotions happen in corporate culture. Like, I know how recognition happens in corporate culture, right? Like, we're a coding bootcamp, we're an education space, but we are a company, right? So I understand how these things work. And so am I potentially not lining myself up for that promotion by making that space? But it's not genuine to me to not make that space. And so I think that there are pieces where I feel like, how am I going to show up as my full self? And it's something that I carry internally with me. That's not even like, we don't have like a LGBTQ employee resource group at my company. Like we don't have even like a Black or Hispanic resource group at my company. So like it's hard for me. Hard is maybe not the right word, but it is something that I carry and think about often, as far as how I show up in the space that is not inclusive, especially when it's not inclusive or called for, or even, welcomed my gender identity or my gender variance. But it still kind of shows up in my everyday activities, even from not asking Gabby to take the minutes for this agenda, because that is a role, like, I can do it, right? Like, I called the meeting, I can set the agenda. I don't need to ask a support staff, usually a female support staff, to do those things for me when it's so caught up in these, these notions of who is getting the recognition, who's getting the work, and whose identity is exalted. So that's something that has been a challenge.
Yeah, you bring up something that's very important too, as it relates to intersectionality. So we can definitely, if anyone has anything to say regarding that, but I think it does make it a lot, very complex on how you engage. Go ahead, love.
Yeah, I think, even just a little bit on the flip side of that, thanks for sharing, Oscar. Like, I constantly think of myself as a work in progress, and I think a lot of people might not deeply recognize the ways in which we actively have to heal from the harms of had to silence and suppress our true selves and our identities. And there are times when I am the one on the other side, not trying to take credit, because I'm trying not to be too much, right? Like,
right.
Trying not to sound like I am so clear and decisive on what I'm thinking, because I don't want to be, well, the man would be confident and assertive, whereas I am like aggressive, right? Or you cut someone off here. So I think I am constantly, even in this moment here, trying to figure out like how measured I am. Like, am I coming across as pleasant enough? Like, will what I'm saying be received very well? So I think there's W.B. Du Bois talks about like the double consciousness, and I think that we're all grappling with double. I am a 2-time immigrant, triple consciousness. I I think about all the verticals and intersections of which I have existed, and even new identities that I have taken on. And I actively, you know, back to your question, just think about like every time I'm going to embrace a new identity, like, oh, now I'm going to be a mother in the workplace. Will I now have to have questions or conversations around how competent I am, how committed I am, whether or not I'm clear-minded or acting from a place of emotions, and the ways in which we might have to silence our true selves and true feelings. And I think part of that resistance is actively living in that consciousness of healing the harms that have been perpetuated, and also calling ourselves into and leaning into our true strengths so that we can work from the best place possible.
Yes, totally. Continuing to stretch ourselves for sure.
Absolutely. I love that you mentioned double consciousness, because that's always been my struggle in the workplace, as someone who they call the disruptor. That was my label, because anytime there was a policy, anytime there was a decision that was made, the work that we do, y'all, you could tell that it was rooted in a form of corporate culture that was harmful for BIPOC folks. And so for me, it's always been the label of the disruptor and choosing not to assimilate. And so when you go in a corporate setting and you choose not to assimilate, as a Black woman, you are the angry Black woman. You are the over-emotional Black woman. And so you find yourself in this battle, right? Like, who am I? Who can I be in this place? What mask do I have to put on every day? But when you're actively working on your healing journey, you know, there came a point with I had to have a therapist, and my therapist had to say, what's your exit strategy? Because this is not good for your mental health. And you have to yourself, either you stay in those harmful environments while, for me, advocating for social change, and then you create your exit strategy. And it was the exit strategy that helped me come into my full self and know that I'm healed. And now I look back and I say, well, how can I go back and help other organizations, you know, think about the ways that they're harmful, and the ways that if there's no EAP program that gives therapy support, or as Oscar said, for Oscar not to have a support group in his place of work, that's a big deal, right? Because who are you identifying with, right? Who are you having common humanity with in that environment? Because most of these environments were built with a double conscious mindset. Like, you have to work twice as hard to get half of what your colleagues have. And it feels like a performance. And so for me, I got tired of performing, and the exit strategy helped.
Yeah. And I hear it's extra strategy, but it's also your value strategy as well. You exercising those uncompromising guiding principles to say, you know what, enough is enough. This is my time, and I'm truly going to walk in that freedom. Like I often tell everybody, this is my freedom space, because my speech isn't censored, right? I'm saying what's of top of mind with respect, but it comes from a place of education. And so with that, as we educate people, how do we counter that? How do we, for some people who may feel like they're being antagonized or torn down because of us focusing on one certain group, what do you do, you know, in those instances to educate those individuals, or to mirror? I think, Love, you had a really good perspective on some of the techniques, you and Oscar.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I want to just lift up something that Maisha mentioned.
Go ahead.
Innovation. I think organizations need to begin to question how they provide support. So I know earlier, a few months ago, you know, we all did Juneteenth and all of that. I think if companies are beginning to say that people are differently treated here, and they recognize that there are microaggressions or inequities in the workplace, then maybe we need to start tacking on some extra mental health days for underrepresented people, because we all are differently affected. So for me, that's kind of part of the tackling process, like not just educating yourself, but also recognizing that you might have to apply some equity to the support, because I'm gonna need more days to grieve from a bunch of the stuff that's happening in a particular environment. But onto this piece around, you know, like, what do we do? I think I come from the school of thought of using a lot of conflict transformation and restorative justice to do my work. And sometimes what that means is that we have to be a mirror to someone, whether it's like being an ally. And sometimes people are a little bit nervous about calling out someone else, but there are lots of techniques that you can do. And that is actually just to factually reflect what the person said. It's like you see something happening, you say, "Hi, Oscar, I noticed that you said this. And I just wanted to check in with you," right? Because once you do a bit of active listening or reflective practice, people can say, "Oh, actually, I didn't mean it like that," or they get a chance to step back from it, because I believe that at the core of who we are as humans, we crave connectedness. And sometimes we are just misaligned because of all the stuff that's happening around us. So sometimes that accountability is to just be a mirror to people, reflect to them what their behaviors are showing up as, and giving them an opportunity to step back from it and be accountable to their environment.
Awesome perspective. Thank you, love.
I love to lead with inquiry. Like, I love to, you know, if I hear something that is ruffling my feathers, I'm like, "Oh, I heard you say XYZ. It's like, is that what you meant?" You know, because sometimes people don't realize when you, exactly what Love was saying, like when you repeat back or mirror back, you know, sometimes they're like, "Oh, wait, actually, no, that sounds real suspect." And usually it is very suspect. That's why we're asking about it. I also want to go back real quick, just something to Maisha brought up about, like, you know, making an exit strategy. I want to acknowledge too, like, there's sometimes, especially Black, Indigenous, people of color, Latinx folks, like, they may not be in a position to have an exit strategy, or, like, you know, what is the both and of that, right? Like, you know, sometimes folks are in, like, you know, I may not have like a community of support, although I do find individual, you know, colleagues and coworkers that I do have that. But hypothetically, if I didn't have that, I wouldn't necessarily be able to just like leave my job right now, right? Like, I wouldn't be able, especially in time of COVID, you know. So how are we doing like both and, right? Like, I have a friend right now, he is a, you know, Black African man, like, he's very much so struggling in his retail job, and at the same time, you know, he doesn't feel like he can leave, you know, like, he doesn't feel like he has the opportunity to leave. It's like, how, I think this question of how we maybe tackle some of the things that are happening in our workspaces or in any space at the onset, and even regardless of there maybe being an outcome or a change, is also valuable, right? Like, you know, so how are we holding the conversation for folks who might not be able to make a substantive change in their, who maybe can't access therapy, who maybe can't, you know, like, what's the both and, I think, on this conversation, and where I feel like allyship really does come into play. I know, Karen, you talked a little bit about that when we spoke previously. I wanted to maybe bring you in around that piece too.
Yeah, it would break my heart if I worked for an organization where someone felt the only way they could be that they could be their whole self was to leave and go someplace else. And I recognize, like, that is the case at organizations. I'm not naive enough to say that's not there, but personally, whether it is, you know, burnout and mental health, whether it is being their whole self in the way they identify, I want my team to challenge me to say, "Hey, like, you say this, but this is the actions," or "We claim this and this is the actions." But I need to help create a culture and an environment where they feel safe to have that conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the hardest thing. And so one thing that, you know, I've just personally been trying is around vulnerability and saying, "I'm not okay. How are you doing today?" And it's okay to not be okay. Or, you know, that is a really hard thing that you're going through. I personally can't relate to it, but how can I help? Or what can I be doing differently? You know, showing that vulnerability of, and this was one thing I thought actually our CEO did a really good job after George Floyd's death, was I don't have the answer and I don't know what to do, but I want to be part of the solution. And that's what you know, whatever we need to do at Order Group, like, we'll figure it out. And again, it's not a magic wand. It's not like gonna all change tomorrow, but I'm hoping that by showing I want to be an ally, that creating a culture of allyship, we can at least start to have those conversations. So where we do have blind spots or unconscious bias or flat out things that, you know, are happening that we just don't know about, we can at least start the conversation to try to make it better. And And that's one thing Maisha mentioned earlier about like journey, like that just word is so resonating with me because I can't fix it tomorrow, but I want to be on the journey to make sure we're getting better.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing, Karen. You actually had a really good example on when there was an incident where you had some blind spots and you opened up. Could you please share about that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a situation where I was in the elevator with someone on our team, and they are a Black woman, and someone in the elevator assumed that they worked for the building versus working at a company that was in the building. Obviously, this was a long time ago. She's very witty, and she came back with a very quick response to the person that said something. And I laughed more because what she said I thought was funny, and probably because I was uncomfortable. And when I'm uncomfortable, I giggle. That's just my nervous reaction. And I realized I didn't say anything to step up for her. And I didn't know for months later that that was a microaggression and that's how she felt. And I was like, oh, I thought you handled that really well. She's like, no, that was just one moment of my day. I was like, oh my God, I had no idea. So I think just trying to be more present in those moments as much as possible to recognize what's happening around you.
And I think it speaks to you saying that, you know, there was something that I missed.
Yeah.
And I need to address that. And it's not attacking me and my identity as an individual. It's saying that there's an area that I can grow and stretch myself in. And I think when people hear inclusion, they feel as though it's something that they have to change as the individual. This is an exploration. We're all evolving, like Maisha and everyone else says. This is a journey. So what does it look like for me as the individual with this journey? What does it look like for me from the team perspective and organizationally on this journey? Love, you had a really good example as well as it relates to something that you experienced, although it was off work, the next day you had to go to work, you know, after experiencing something that could have been, or that was traumatic at the time. Would you like to share that, please?
I'm trying to pull this to my recollection.
When you were home and there was a knock at the door.
For sure. Huh.
Yeah.
Wow. So you know, I would say I'm new to the American experience from a physical place. I moved to the US about 7 years ago, and I've lived in multiple countries, the most permanent being in the Caribbean, in Jamaica. And I would say in other countries where I've lived, Nigeria, a little bit in the Middle East, like I've not necessarily been the minority, if you will, from a racial point of view. So I like to make a reference for sort of like those who, that's why I really embrace the framing of the journey also, because I think that even in me doing this work on inclusion, we all are evolving. And I think I had my wake up call because, you know, I am in New York, I live in suburban New York, right? So I think all the sort of like stereotypical, if you will, that people like to use model minorities or merit, and if you work hard, you're gonna be okay and you're not gonna experience violence. And I was home making dinner on a random Tuesday afternoon and had a knock on my door because someone who had moved in next door took a peek through the windows and saw some Black people and called the police and said that there was a robbery in progress. So I had to walk away from making my curry chicken or something. I'm sure it was great. I'm speaking of it so freely now because of the healing work, but it took me years to even tell this story because I had friends who said, oh, maybe your neighbors were just looking out for you. Sounds like you had great neighbors. So I was also reeling from questioning this, right? And having to come out and show an ID that I actually was living at that home with like 3 or 4 police at my door with many more police cars outside, you know, having to validate that I belong there. So that for me was just like a starting point to saying, you know, we all are going to have to walk this path. We're going to have some sort of awareness. And I know that there are some persons who you might come across who might be Black or other underrepresented minority who are saying, oh, if you work hard enough and if you pull yourself up, like you're gonna be okay. If you're just respectful, like things are gonna work out fine. And no amount of degrees or no amount of suburbia could save me from this violence. So I think we all are going to be better for a more inclusive world. And, you know, one day it's for me, one day it's for someone else. So that's really why I'm committed to doing this work, because there are ways in which I can use my privilege and access to really clear that path forward for those persons who may not have similar protections that I did, to be able to move forward. So that was a striking experience for me. And again, going to work the next day and trying to experience shock and having someone saying, oh, sounds like you had great neighbors. By the way, I had lived there for 5 years and the neighbor just moved in for 5 days before they called the cops. So I'm not sure.
So that just speaks to the burden that some people carry that we don't speak about, right? So when you think about as an HR leader, as a senior executive within your company, and you know you're thinking about building these support structures or some of the practices that's needed, what are some of those things that could be actualized systemically throughout the organization to help support your talent? What are some of those things? Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, one thing that we're sort of starting with some basics, and just training managers. Actually, we have a training in a couple of weeks on how to have more human one-on-ones. And so how to ask the questions, kind of like we did earlier, you know, how are you today?
Like that.
You know, today's only Wednesday, Thursday? Today's Thursday. How are you today on Thursday? That might have been different than yesterday.
Yeah.
Lord. You know, and how are you feeling this moment? And, you know, are you stressed? Are you happy? Are you sad? Because there's so many times you start off a one-on-one and saying, how are you? And it's so easy to go, fine, hanging in there. Anyway, here's this project I'm working on. But like really opening the door to have those conversations. And again, that takes time. You've got to build that trust and that psychological safety, but just starting with that so that your team members know they have a place to share, so that, you know, God forbid that happened to someone else, like Love Story or any of the stories that we share today. Managers are saying, I'm here for you to have that conversation. If you need something after that, let's talk about it. Just asking the question, how are you? Like legitimately, how are you? Is one thing that we're just starting with. And then we're giving managers tools to hopefully have some other, you know, if the conversation is tough and uncomfortable for them, like how to get over that, because it needs to be about the person that's in front of you, not your awkwardness.
What are your thoughts, Maisha?
Well, one of the ways that we're working is we have a series, a 90-day series that we work with folks on in a corporate space, really around how to have the conversation, similar to Karen at work, navigating energy with boundaries, and just really open conversations, right? So lunch and learns that really are inclusive to the practice of anti-racism, that looks at organizations and companies' responsibility to the response after George Floyd's murder, and then we just kind of go from there.
Thank you for sharing, Maisha. So, you know, Rebecca shared something in a chat where she said, really allowing your staff and your talent to know your intentions and the impact of it. I think that's very important as we, you know, navigate through this journey of inclusion. And so, you know, when you hear senior leaders or executives say, I got to get to the bottom line, what's the best strategy for helping C-level, you know, executives understand the importance of inclusion? Because the reality is we have to make profit, right? We have to continue the day-to-day. What do you say to those leaders, Oscar?
I mean, well, you know, just at a very base level, look, we have to make profit. Like there is a ton of data out there that says more diverse and inclusive companies make better profit and actually perform better. They make more money. They do better. They have better longevity as far as like, you know, not just being a startup that stays a startup, but, you know, being a longer, you know, lasting company. They are able to better retain their employees, right? So they're not experiencing turnover at super high rates. You know, they have not just better like hiring and and retention, but also like, you know, the stickiness that folks feel within their company, right? They feel connected to it. They feel like this is a company that where I can see myself growing. You know, all of the data is out there. Like, it's very easy to make the business case for why companies should be doing this. If you're not doing it, then you're not listening to the business case, you know, and that's on you. Honestly, that's on you. And you're going to have situations like what Maisha described, where folks are developing their exit strategies and finding that company where they can be and bring their full selves to work. You know, I see that with some of the students who we graduate out of our boot camp. You know, they have the skills to go to a Google, an Amazon, a Facebook, et cetera. But many of them are like, you know, they're doing their research and they're saying, I don't want to work at a company where I can't bring my full self to work. You know, I don't want to be in a place where I'm going to have to sacrifice or challenge my brown or black identity with being a software engineer. And those things are coexist. I want to be able to coexist in my full self. So, you know, honestly, like, the business, so that's one part, right? Like, the business case makes its case itself. There's also, you know, the humanity part, you know, and it's not just, I mean, yeah, you want to have, like, you want to make money, you want to have, you know, lavish, right? But also, like, I don't know, I like J. Cole, like, he has he says, like, you know, it doesn't matter if I'm sitting in the front row if I'm not with my homies, you know, if my homies can't come, right? It doesn't matter if I'm like, you know, on the court side at the basketball game, if, you know, my brothers aren't there with me, you know. So I think that there's a piece of that on a company scale as well. Like, you know, who do you want to be in company with? Who does your company want to be in company with? As we talked about at the top of this call, the newness that's happening is around folks saying, listen, like, you know, this is a place of urgency now. Like, you know, I have choices to make. Am I going to, before, people were sacrificing pieces of themselves to make those choices, right? They were saying, okay, you know, I'll be black on the weekend and I'll just show up at work, clock in, clock out, job, you know, and then I will come, you know, and I'll, at that concept that W.E.B. Du Bois talked about, the sense of two-ness. They're like, okay, I'll just carry, you know, and I do this a lot. I have to check myself sometimes because I definitely, code switch often, you know, where like, I'll be in an environment and I will, you know, I'll play up the fact that I'm from Long Island versus saying New York, you know, like, or things like that, to basically present myself as this safe black person. And folks have done that for a long time in order to attain safety, to attain financial freedom, to attain, you know, some of these things that, you know, that help us get through, but, you know, that maybe some people take, you know, for advantage that they just have given to them, right? So we play into that. I have played into that when we speak for myself. But now in this place of urgency, when like the world is falling down, I'm all like, I don't want to do that anymore. It takes too much energy for me to have to continuously bifurcate myself. So let me be my whole self and go to the places where I can be that. So, you know, on the company side, you're going to lose employees. You're going to lose profit because people are going to, you know, you're going to get shamed on social media. Like, you know, people are going to say, oh, you know, cancel Amazon, right? You know, like people are not going to want, you're going to get a bad reputation in a sense, right? And you want to recognize that your reputation on how you address social issues like race, social issues like inclusion are not separate from, oh, we're just a data company. Oh, we're just, you know, we just make thumbnails. We just, you know, those things are no longer those part and parcel from each other. They are actually, you know, together, and people want to make those thumbnails at a place where they feel like they can be their whole self.
Yeah, well said, Oscar. Kel said in the chat, he said, you don't need a business case for diversity.
You don't. You don't. You don't.
That's the reality.
That's the reality.
Yeah, that's what we need to say, right? You're running a business, and a part of that is having a diverse group of people. But it's not its own separate thing. Make it a part of the business. And Love, you had a really good perspective on that as well. You know, when we talked, look how you, don't look at me like that, Love, please. So please share your perspective on that.
So, I mean, for me, baseline from a human rights lens, inclusion is owed, right? We are not here to negotiate our humanity. We don't have to validate our humanity for your bottom line or your profit margin, right? I think that's just not on the table to negotiate anymore. So I think if there are leaders who still think that they need to negotiate on the validity and the worthiness of certain bodies, then they haven't even, they're not yet at the table. There's a whole different work that they need to do on that lens. So I think it's just like important. Now, when it comes to the data, I like to splice the data a little bit. More diversity, the truth of it is that more diversity within a space, because there is no commonness in experiences, can actually trigger conflict.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What actually gets you the innovation is the inclusion. Now, inclusion is what's correlated from a data point of view to psychological safety, and that's really what gets you innovation. When people feel included, they feel safe to contribute, and when they feel safe to contribute, you get brilliant ideas, and then you push your company forward. So if you just want to get warm brown bodies in the room or diverse bodies for your marketing campaign and shiny magazine, that's not going to get you anywhere. What's going to get you is a bad reputation in the streets that you pipeline. Everybody is going to know that you go in and you go out through the other door. And if you're a big name company, what you do now is probably get their stamp of approval. It's like, oh, I work for X high profile company and I keep it moving, right? So people, within 6 to 18 months, what the data says, within 6 to 18 months, people do a scan and they know whether or not they're included there. They know whether or not they're welcome there. So that's really the difference. One, there's no more negotiation, but two, diversity doesn't get you innovation, doesn't get you the bottom line. It's really inclusion and psychological safety. So that really means that the accountability has to be through the roof, because you just can't profit off people's bodies anymore, like beyond the branding stuff. And you actually now just have to have inclusion running through the entire employee experience, not as a one-off program somewhere, not as a side lunch and learn that's happening after hours that shows your level of priority. It needs to be in prime time, and it needs to get voice by the highest leaders in the room, and not some token D&I person that was hired so that they can say things that can show that your company's, now part of the game. So I think those are
you dropping gems.
We're gonna know.
Keep dropping gems. Yes, go ahead, Maisha. I'm sorry I cut you off.
Oh no, I said that's 100% factual. Love it. That's all.
Yes. You also, you have a unique approach as well on keeping people accountable and giving them these tools. So now it's, what do we do, y'all? We have certain people that still aren't able to see it, and they're like, I need the help, I need the understanding, I need the practices or systems or tools. Let's drop some more bombs on them before we close out on this session. So go ahead, Maisha, and share.
I think Love summed it up. It's not a one-day workshop. A lot of these companies, as she said, they hire D&I specialists to have these once-a-month workshops, and then they think the work is done. If you don't have buy-in from your senior leadership, it's just the company spending money to uphold what they want to continue to do. And so for us, it's, you got to commit. It takes, they say 90 days to create a habit. And it starts at a corporate level audit and stakeholder analysis to get you some data to know, what do we need to change in our organization, right? What are the steps that folks need to see so they do feel included, and so they do have a sense of safety here. But that's one of the things, to stop expecting to go to a 30-minute workshop or have an author come on and read a chapter of their book and ask some questions about their book and think that the work is done. That's you just putting your toe in the water. You need to commit to like a 6-month to 1-year process with a consultant who is not your diversity and inclusion strategist, because that they have their own internal biases about how they think it should go. You need the outside experts to come in, and I'm just going to say, you need outside experts who hold a marginalized identity,
yes, ma'am,
who have the lived experience,
yes, ma'am,
as well as the corporate professional experience to help you come in and make social transformation. Because if you can hire people who look like you, if you continue to hire white men and white women to come and lead this work, then, one of my best friends says, you can't be the problem and the solution. You can't be the poison and the antidote. So you have to lead into discomfort. You have to lead into the discomfort, invite someone who holds a marginalized identity inside your organization to audit, to create a transformative process so employees know. And I'm going to end with this, to have a restorative justice approach to end conflict and harm so that everyone can be held accountable to what happens within the organization from the top all the way to the bottom.
Bomb drop, girl. Come on.
Individual work. Someone just
That's not your last word, though. I won't let that be your last word. It's more coming from you. So Tarina and Martha, though. Martha said this is a life work, not a program. Tarina said this is soul work. Karen, you made this a part of your soul work, and you made it work with your CEO and the executives there. What is your advice to those who are seeking to do the same thing?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I kind of had this realization that by just checking the box or making sure I had a good EEOC report or like all those sort of just data-driven things and not actually part of our strategy, it was like saying I had a Black friend. Like we were missing the actual point of what we wanted in our organization. And so for us, we really are trying, I mean, definitely trying, journey, really important to call that out, that it is part of our values and we are purposeful in what we're trying to do. So if we are, it's not just about posting to a job board and saying, well, we posted it to, you know, a job board that is supposed to attract Black engineers. It's saying, what are we missing in order to better both attract and then have them successfully go through our interview process and hopefully get hired? And if not, what are we missing? What unconscious biases are we missing? Is there language in our job descriptions that we're missing? And like really, you know, holding that mirror up to us and saying, we're clearly missing something. What are we doing wrong? And then I think it was Oscar that said, awesome, we got some amazing underrepresented people on board. Are we doing things to make sure they stay and are part of, you know, feel like they are part of our culture? We try to talk about culture add, not culture fit. So even those little things, trying to do things like not saying you guys, but saying the team or y'all, or I don't know, whatever phrase you want to use, but trying to make those little changes to show that it's part of our values at Order Groove, that we want to be an inclusive and safe environment for everyone and for their whole self. So even just those little things, I hope, are sending the right signal and starting to create the change. And through our Diversity Council, which is a volunteer group from every department, tenure, age, race, sexual orientation, all of the above, a volunteer group that's actually making recommendations to Order Groove around what we need to be doing. So it's not me, it's not an HR thing, it's members of our organization that are helping us think through this.
Thank you so much for sharing. You're putting in the work.
Yes,
the work that's
we're trying.
needed.
Yeah.
And no, you're doing, right? And so as I do, I discover what works and what doesn't work. Then I go back. This is called heuristic solutioning and coaching, right? Then I go back, assess the impact or not, and I shift my next step to move forward. So there is some type of steps and growth that's occurring. It may not be what you initially intended, but you will get there. And that's what we want you guys to understand, is that we will get there, as this isn't for the faint at heart. Just like when you plan whatever other initiatives within your organization, put the same level of effort.
Yes.
So Oscar, let's talk about what's required, what's needed in this effort. What are some of those gems you have?
Well, I love hearing about all of the actions and strategies that Karen mentioned, and I don't want folks to feel daunted, right, at the same time, because, you know, like, you can start this right now, because I think that we should not, one of the things I wish I had said before is, like, you can't let perfection be the enemy of good. You know, if your intention is that you want to make change, you want to make positive change, like, you know, your intention is that you want to make, you know, Black and brown folks feel safe at your company, feel safe around you personally. I mean, I think also that's where it starts too, right? You know, do a scan on your social habits and your social circle, and where you get your news from, where you get your information from, who you follow on social media, who you listen to on the radio, you know, like things like that I think are also very influential. Like, just do a personal, like, assessment, an account of, like, where you are individually, because also, like, there are definite, like, structural changes that need to be made. There are definite, like, you know, systematic issues that are at play, and change starts with each one, right? Like, you know, so there's a both and approach, right? There's that fable that has always really resonated with me, right? Like, there's two, let me tell it real quick. So there's two men who are walking along a river. Some folks might have heard it, right? There are these two people. They're two people, not men, right? This is, again, Karen, right? Shifting from, I'm learning right now. Okay, so
real-time growth. That's what we call it.
There's two people who are walking along a river. and they come across someone who's drowning in the river, and they're like, help me, I'm drowning in the river, please help me. The two of them jump in to help the person, they rescue them from the river. They keep walking along and they come across another person similarly, I'm drowning, help me, save me from the river. The two of them go in to save that person from the river. They come across the third person, help me, I'm drowning in the river, please help me. One of them goes in to save the person in the river. The other person starts heading upstream, and he's like, hey, they're like, hey, come help me. This person is in the river. I need your help to help save them. And the person says, you help this person who's drowning in the river. I'm going upstream to find out why people are falling in the river in the first place.
Wow.
I think that there's this two-pronged approach to how we are addressing these issues, right? There is what's happening right now. We need to recognize that there are people who are drowning in the river right now, and they need to be
Oscar.
And then there are also, these systematic issues at play, structural changes that need to be made, and policy efforts that need to be changed, like advocacy that needs to be done on a systematic level that figures out why people end up in the river in the first place.
Right.
So I think that there's the things that Karen was talking about, the things that Maisha were talking about, like, what are the structural changes that are happening in your company culture? What are your hiring practices? Are there ERGs for your folks to find community? Do you have a mental health day option? Do you provide mental health insurance coverage? Like, there are those things that are happening on a systematic level. And then there is like, I just had a meeting with so-and-so and they touched my hair, like that's a microaggression.
Right. That happens.
That happens too. We need to address those things as well. So I just want to acknowledge that there needs to be a both and approach. It starts with the individual conversations, activities, and things that happen between one-to-one people or small group. And then there's also these larger systemic issues that we also need to challenge. And you need to find out for yourself where you fit in that. Like, are you the person who's jumping into the river and helping folks out of the river? Or are you the person who wants to try to make systemic change and head upstream? Because there are different approaches to that. And I want folks to kind of be empowered by, it's not, you don't have to do everything today.
No.
Do everything next week or by the end of the year, but do something individually with yourself today that even if it's just to start saying like, oh, well, who do I look up on social media? Those things like that. Who's a part of your social circle? Where are you getting your news? Where are you getting your info? Because I think that will inform.
Yeah, and be okay with that. Again, there are multiple members of the body, okay? My eyes is used for a reason. I use my nose for something and my mouth for something. Identify how you want to operate organically. Oscar, he may be an advocate in something else, and my advocacy is in something different. Be okay with that and operate organically in it so you don't get stuck in paralysis analysis or analysis paralysis, right? So find your place, if anything else, right? So as we close, please give me that takeaway, that one thing that you want to tell these HR leaders and attendees here as it relates to this new age of inclusion.
So I want to jump in just because it follows up with Oscar.
Go ahead, love.
In going up the river, right? I'm all about the systems and structure. I'm always every now and then putting back my lawyer hat, right? And I think that we need to make the unconscious conscious, and we can't topple the system by individualism. Part of white supremacy is individualism and shifting away from the collective. We need to create some collective fail-safes. For far too long, we have said, we don't know, this is just a microaggression. Companies hold themselves accountable for the things that are important to them. And if diversity and inclusion is something that's important to you, you need to really look at using systems like restorative justice to begin to counter those microaggressions, those inequities that are happening. You can't use a checkbox system of investigating. We just saw with Breonna Taylor what happens when investigation uses the existing systems and structures. You will not get justice out of the existing systems and structures. So what this means is that we need an entire new system of interrogating the injustices and the inequities within our systems so that we can stop this hemorrhage and this bleeding that's happening and the damage that's happening to people that have been within our systems. So I think we definitely have to do the individual work, but we need to head up the river. Thank you for that, Oscar, and start doing some structural saving so that we can make this right.
Go ahead, Karen, Maisha.
Yeah, Oscar and Love, just y'all just keep hitting the nail on the head. I don't have to say anything. But it's really just remembering that this is the individual work, but in the workplace, it's the collective journey. So it's coming together and going up the stream. And you know, Audre Lorde said, you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. And so it's going to take another level of dismantling systemically for the change to start to happen. So as Love said, the TICS box is a tool of the master, as Audre Lorde says. So what are you creating? Who are you bringing in as your conflict mediation specialist? Is your organization having restorative justice circle practices from senior leadership all the way to the bottom? Like what does that look like? And a lot of y'all in the comments are like, well, what does restorative justice have to do with being in the workplace environment? When you restore justice, you're restoring the community, because although it's a workplace, it's still a community. There's still a collective energy that's there. And a lot of organizations say in their copy and on their websites, we are a community that believes. And if you are that community, then you have to have things in place to uphold that in safe and nonviolent ways. That's it.
Karen, close us out.
Yeah.
Thank you, Aisha.
Oh my goodness. I would say, just start with something. Just pick one thing. It won't be wrong. Just pick something. And then we've used the mirror phrase a lot. Be the role model, be the change you want to see in others. As HR leaders, you know, it probably has to start with you. So do your own work on yourself and then be the role model for others.
Thank you, everyone, to all the panelists, all the attendees. Thank you so much for your time. I know that you walked away with some wisdom from our amazing and brilliant panelists. Please continue to check them out on social media, follow them, as well as connect to their organizations. Thank you again to Blueboard. Thank you, ThinkHuman, for this opportunity. This was amazing. And from the feedback, guys, I've gotten and I've seen, people have said this is one of the best webinars that they've attended in a while. So you guys were amazing. Thank you again.
Thanks, everyone. Great to be
Thank you. Thank you, Hakima. Love the energy. You're amazing.
Ready for the rest of my day now, right? You know?
Thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you again, everyone. Everybody say thank you.
Thank you.
Jackie, Hannah, Portia.
Yeah.
Stephanie, thank you.
Appreciate all the engagement.
So many amazing comments.
Engaged.
Yes.
Yes. So Fatma, do I stop the recording?
Yeah, you can just end the webinar.
All right, sorry.